Evolutionary.org hard podcast coming your way. We got another one for ya, 553. This one's going to be how to properly look at blood work and dosing while on TRT. So we have a TRT series going, testosterone replacement therapy, and a lot of people out there, they'll go to doctors or they'll go to anti-aging clinics or do self TRT. So very important, no matter what you do, that you know what's going on in your body and you have access to that blood work and you see that blood work and you keep it so that you can look at it and in the future. So it's very important to do that. Don't just go to the doctor, the anti-aging clinic, and have them do your blood work and then don't even look at it. No. And then if you have questions, you need to figure out what's going on too. It's like taking your car to the auto mechanic and just letting him work on your car, not even being aware of what they did. Then a year later, you have another problem, and then you take it to the auto mechanic, a different auto mechanic, and they're like, well, yeah, I took my car a year ago to the auto mechanic. Well, what did they do to it? And I'm like, I don't know. I didn't keep the paperwork or anything. So it's very important to track this stuff. Same thing with your teeth. You get your dental records from one dentist to another. There's a reason for that. It's so that they can track what's going on to your teeth so they don't have to start all over again with you. So it's very important to actually track this stuff and know what's going on. So that's what we're going to do on this podcast. We're going to kind of go over all this stuff. So first off, there are options for you in America. We're going to talk about how to get blood work because that's an important one. So in America, there are options depending on what state you live in, but there are private companies online that you can just go online, order the blood work, get it emailed to you, print it out, and then take it into the lab. Then they'll email you the results in the next day or the next 2-3 days. So that's an option. The other option, of course, going to a doctor. Another option is going to an anti-aging clinic who's going to send you to a doctor. And in both those cases, they will draw up the paperwork and send you to the lab. But even in those cases, it's very important to know what they're doing for you. So what I recommend is a full hormone panel. You can also do something called a bodybuilder panel if you wanted to do it on your own. There are the private companies that you're able to go and get lab work done and order online. They have something called a bodybuilder panel. So those are options for you. So you come on the forums, check out in my signature. I have a link to a blood work that goes over all this and tells you exactly what to do. But it's very important when you get the blood work done that you get your organs checked, you get your testosterone levels checked, you get all of your HPTA numbers, your estradiol, your LH, FSH. This is all important to get done. Go ahead, Mobster. You wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I'm just going to make sure that I will include in the articles, the notes that we attach to these podcasts, guys, a link for Steve's link. And I will also recommend at least one, if not two places in the UK that I'm aware of where you can do exactly the same. And one specifically, Steve, is actually run by a fella that used to be an absolutely giant bodybuilder. So he knows that side of it very, very well. So you've got a couple of choices. Of course, you can also come on the forums and ask us as well, guys. So back to you, Steve.
Well, back to you. Tell us what your options are over there in Europe.
Okay, yeah. So one here in the United Kingdom, the one I actually just thought of it as you were talking is a company called Eval, and you can find them on Facebook. That's EVAL, and that's run by he used to be something stupid like 350 or 400 pounds. Dave Crossan, great artist, but also an absolute freak. He's actually, funny enough, we got a company with similar name. He was the guy that put out the DVD some years ago called UG Freak or UG the Freak. And these were documentaries about his journey to 400 pounds. He does bloodletting. So, for example, you're supposed to donate blood when you're on steroids sometimes, guys, because your issues. We get into that, obviously. But he was an absolute size monster. And he set up a company a few years ago. He's very highly qualified. He's gone off to uni, got college degrees, etc., 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 in the study of performance-enhancing drugs. But the company was specifically about getting blood tests, bloodletting, and obviously his particular facet of interest would be obviously in the use of performance enhancing drugs, or of course in this case, the necessity for TRT and unhealthy bloods. I do know one or two UK pros that have mentioned it in videos they've done for YouTube, where they actually, and it's not something they talk about a lot for some reason, Steve, but for whatever reason, it's come up on a video when they talk about, as you said, I think, getting bloods in a previous show, getting your blood tested 3 to 4 times a year if you're on performance enhancing drugs. So there are options out there, guys. There are others that you can ask. Come on the forums, check the show notes, etc., and we'll have more information for you in that particular regard. But Steve's, for the US especially, discounted, properly done test with all the correct tests to get for health, for performance enhancement, and so on and so forth. And obviously, what we're going to try and do here is help you to learn how to read them and the markers you need to look at for. Back to you, Steve.
Yeah, and the things I mentioned to get, these are standard things. So if your doctor is ordering your blood work and he's not including these, you need to have a talk with him or her, and tell them, no, this is what I need. I would like to get these numbers checked, and tell them, hey, I was consulted, whatever, and this is what they recommend and I get. And look, if your doctor's not going to work with you, they're not going to listen to you, then find a new one, because this is basic stuff. This is basic knowledge you should know, and you should keep a file of your blood work. And this way you can access it. If you use the company I was telling you about on the forum that you can go and then you can check out, they actually save your stuff on the website. You just log into their website and they have all your blood work, all your past blood work. So you can just go on there and bring it up anytime you need it. But if you're going to go to a doctor, they need to print that shit out for you, so you have a record, that they can always look at. So you need to know where you're at today versus where you are 6 months ago, or a year and a half ago, 2 years, etc. Otherwise, you're going to be lost on this. So these are basic information. So let's kind of go through the things that are going to be important to get. Now, obviously, the first thing that we want to understand is what happens when you go on TRT, and that's your HPTA shuts down. And that's because your pituitary glands realize that you're getting an excessive amount of hormones and androgens. So it says, you know what? I don't need to function anymore. There's too much of this. So it shuts down and it stops producing its own hormones. So you're going to notice when you're on TRT that it's normal for your LH and your FSH, LH being your luteinizing hormone and your FSH, your follicle stimulating hormone, which are being spit out by your pituitary glands. These are going to go to 0 or near 0. And it's going to show up low on your blood work. And that's normal. So if you're doing self blood work on your own and you go get your blood work done, you see that and it says low, and it's at 0, don't come on the forum and start freaking out. I've seen so many guys do this. We get a guy doing that at least like once a month, and they freak out. They're like, oh my God, my LH is at 0. What's going on here? Well, it's supposed to be at 0, because why would your pituitary glands produce hormones when you're getting in them already exogenously? So that's what happens. So that's something to watch out for when you get blood work done. Total testosterone. Obviously, this is very important. You want your you're on TRT for a reason, and that's to have normal testosterone levels. So your total testosterone level should be somewhere between 300 and 950 nanograms per deciliter. So you can do the conversions to nanomoles for your side of the pond, Mobster. But at the end of the day, they need to be in the range. If it's too high, then you're running too much TRT. If it's too low, you're not running enough. So again, if you're going through a doctor or anti-aging clinic, you have to talk with them. You'd be like, look, especially if it's an anti-aging clinic, because they do this a lot, they give you too much testosterone. You tell them, my test levels are at 1400. This is too high. And they're probably going to be like, what are you upset about? We're giving you more than a doctor is going to give you. Well, you should be upset because there's health ramifications for overdosing on too much TRT. It's not going to benefit you over the long term. You might feel great because you're getting an excess amount of androgens, way more androgens than you're supposed to be getting, even if you had a healthy body and even if you were producing a strong amount of testosterone as a 20-year-old. But if you're 50 years old and you're getting too much, it's not a good thing either. So look for that. And you need to talk to your doctor or talk to the businessman at the anti-aging clinic and be like, look, I need to get this corrected. And on the flip side, you might have a doctor who gives you too little testosterone and your levels are in the 200s. So you need to talk to him on that side and be like, look, why are my levels at 200s?
Let me
Go ahead,
jump in for a
Mobster.
second.
Mhm.
Yeah, jump in for a second here, Steve. So note what Steve just said about the causing problems. If you are genuinely in need of TRT, or even you've decided in your wisdom that you're going to go on TRT for life because of the benefits, but your levels are as high as what Steve suggested, then there are issues. And the obvious issue here, Steve, would just be the strain on your organs. So, guys, it's one thing to have a quality of life, but it's another thing to take some years off your life by potentially risking damage to your organs, the kind that keep you alive. So it's as simple as that, Steve. It really is. And it's that sort of thing about being able, I mean, one analogy, let me just touch on this as well, Steve. So one of the things that we sometimes say on the forums is that we recommend getting blood tests just to see if the gear, and that's how we put it when we're talking on the forums, is legit. Some guys get a little bit obsessed with those the crazy numbers. They want to see the numbers up in the thousands. In reality, their idea is, of course, that if it's up in the thousands, that the anabolic response to their body is going to be absolutely crazy. But that's not necessarily the case. And of course, as that to that individual response, Steve, I think that you and I have touched on this before. I've actually said, without a blood test, I suspect my levels are kind of normal, but my ability to respond to what is a normal level, my affinity, if you like, and my ability to quote unquote get as much out of it as I possibly can is quite good. It's why I do well on low dosages when I do use steroids, and why I think my normal levels are kind of low, because if my or average, Steve, because if they were high, then low dosage, for example, D-bol 30 milligrams, 50 milligrams a day ain't going to do shit if my levels were naturally 1500, 2000, whatever. So it's that kind of situation. So what we're looking at here, guys, is and I want to qualify this, Steve. We know that our listeners are going to be the type of people that hit the gym and want to see the benefits, but you have to remember that TRT generally is for medical reasons and not for performance enhancement. Either way, the ability to read those tests and look out for markers that show that you are getting benefits, health benefits, or equally that there are markers that you need to look at which might be a sign of unhealthy behavior or unhealthy levels is super, super important. So if you need to, guys, go back and listen to the sections that Steve's giving you advice on again for those numbers, and especially the numbers where you need to be able to read the test and understand what you should be seeing. It ain't always about that crazy testosterone level. You should be looking at other things too. So yeah, I'm going to double hammer that one, Steve, so that the listeners, and especially the forum listeners, know exactly what they're looking for both good and for bad. Back to you, Steve.
Next one we're talking about is free testosterone. Now, I wouldn't waste my time getting this unless it's included already. Your free testosterone, if your total testosterone is within range, your free testosterone is going to be in range. If it's high, then free testosterone will be high. Vice versa, if it's low, free testosterone is going to be low. So I wouldn't really waste my time with this one unless it's included. But it should be somewhere between 32 and 150 PG by ml. Estradiol, very important, 15 to 50 PG by ml. And what happens is when you're on TRT, it's going to aromatize into estrogen in your body, a very, very slow amount, very low amount. If you're using the proper amount of TRT, then it will. But if you're overdosing, then your estradiol is going to be high. This is what I was telling you earlier. If your testosterone levels are at 1400, right? And they should only be at 950 max on TRT. So you're getting too much testosterone. Your estradiol is going to be high as well, most likely. So now the anti-aging clinic is going to come in here and be like, look, your estradiol is high. You know what they're going to tell you? They're going to tell you, no, we're not going to lower your dose. We're going to put you on an anti-estrogen. So now it's something else they can charge you for on top of the testosterone, you see? So they're making more money now. So not only are they giving you too much of it, they're also giving you a drug that you don't need on top of it. So this is why you should be running your TRT at a proper dose. High estrogen levels, there are consequences. Estrogen, we know, increases your chance of cancer cell growth in the body. This is why women who are breast cancer survivors get put on Nolvadex or another anti-estrogen drug for years after they survive cancer. It's so that they don't get any estrogen rebound and that cancer doesn't come back. So the same thing in your body. If you overdose on TRT and you let your estradiol get too high, then you're basically opening up yourself for cancer cells to grow. So that's a good reason not to do it. Not to mention bitch tits, gynecomastia. You don't want that. You don't want water retention, because the water retention is going to have other things that it's going to cause in your body to watch out for. So we're going to get into that now as well. Red blood cell count. Your red blood cell count should be somewhere between 4.15 to 5.8. Now, if your red blood cells are high, then that's another thing that can and will happen when you overdose on TRT. So you want to make sure those are level, because if your red blood cell count runs hot for a long period of time, that's going to strain your heart. So that is going to shorten your lifespan. The number one killer in America is heart disease. So you're going to go on TRT and then give yourself heart disease because you're overdosing it too much in your red blood cell count. So keep your red blood cell count in range, keep it under control. Glucose is another thing to look for. Now, going on TRT and not going on TRT should not affect your glucose very much at all, but it could. And I'll tell you why. Because if you go on TRT, your appetite goes up, you start eating a lot more food, you start eating a lot more of the wrong foods. That can cause your glucose to go up. So indirectly, going on TRT could cause an issue, but it's not likely. But you always want to keep your glucose under 90, 99 max. If you're over 100, it means you're pre-diabetic. Obviously, you want to be fasted when you go into your blood work. You don't want to have chocolate cake and then go get your glucose tested. That's not going to end well for you. But you want to keep your glucose. Glucose is a really good indicator of insulin sensitivity, insulin resistance. So it's also a good indicator your diet is shit. So look at the time restricted eating, look at the fasting, get that number under control if it is high. It should not be over 100. Now, blood urea nitrogen. This is an important one. BUN, 6 to 20 milligrams per deciliter. So it's a waste product derived from protein breakdown in the liver. So a lot of weightlifters, Monster and I talked about on the pre-show, blood urea nitrogen and creatinine are going to be high a lot of times. And with creatinine, the max is 1.27 milligrams per deciliter. So very important with this one to be aware of. It can come in high through supplements, through diet, through weight training and all that stuff. I know, Mobster, you want to talk about it, but it's important to know before Mobster jumps in that it's not a good thing for it to be high. There's a reason bodybuilders don't live a long time. It's because if your liver and your kidneys are constantly doing extra work as bodybuilders because you're holding so much mass and the muscles are breaking down on a day-to-day basis. So yes, it is something to be concerned about. This is why it's a good idea to deload, to cycle your protein. If you're on a high protein bodybuilder diet, it's important to cycle off of that. Maybe go vegetarian for 2 weeks. Maybe do a nice long fast here and there to get this number under control. Take a break from the gym, let your body heal. But just keeping it hot, your creatinine and your blood urea nitrogen hot nonstop for years and years and years is going to come back and bite you. But again, this should not be elevated from TRT. So this would be elevated with or without TRT. It would not matter. But when you're on TRT and you go and you start eating more and you start working out more and you're motivated, I can see how this could be affected as well. So Mobster, you can touch on that for sure.
Yeah. So essentially what we're talking about here, guys, is you're getting a blood test to see how healthy or unhealthy you are. And these numbers that Steve just said will be skewed by the simple fact, quite perversely, Steve, that we imagine that we're living a healthy lifestyle because we're killing it in the gym. We're stronger, we're fitter, we're more supple, all those kind of things. But unfortunately, the breakdown of muscle tissue, lactic acid, and all those fun things that happen when we're in the gym, the magic of muscle building, and our diet are actually giving false values. Now, as Steve said, let's imagine that I didn't work out and I didn't use creatine. And I went for a blood test, and my creatinine levels, which was a waste product of training, and also can be skewed by the breakdown of creatine in my body as a supplement would be sky high if I had a medical issue. It shouldn't be sky high. So what Steve talks about with fasting, with taking a break, etc. Why do we say that? Because here's the thing, right? You're going to get a blood test to see whether you're healthy or not. We don't want those numbers to be skewed by use of creatine. We don't want those numbers to be skewed by the fact that we train. We don't want those numbers to be skewed by the fact that we're consuming high levels of protein. So we do without those things. I would typically say, I think with creatine, I think it was 4 or 5 days. A couple of the other things, Steve might be right, but at least 5 days, then go and get that test. So listen, if you guys are going to have a rest from training, but you also want to see how healthy you are, and especially as is the topic of this podcast that we're doing, when you're on TRT, don't train, don't take creatine, and lower it back to normal kind of levels of protein for at least 5 days, then go and get that test, because then it's going to give you a much truer picture of what's going on. If the numbers are still high, especially if the bad numbers are still high, then there's an underlying issue that we need to look at. And that would be whether you're doing it yourself, privately, you're looking at your numbers, you're dealing with someone like the people that we recommended, or you're doing it for your insurance or your own doctor. You don't want the numbers to be skewed by the fact that you train because you're consuming protein, because you're using creatine and so on and so forth. You want to see a proper, clear picture of what your values actually are. Now, you will still be, if you're on genuine TRT, still using low levels of testosterone. So we want to see the effect that's having on the body, regardless of those others numbers and potential problems that we create for ourselves by skewing the numbers. Now, guys, I will touch on this very, very briefly. We have seen, of course, where people have deliberately skewed their numbers by training, by taking a test at different times of day, by staying up half the night, and so on and so forth, as a way of getting on insurance covered, paid for TRT via the NHS, via private medical insurance in the States. That's a topic for another time, and certainly one that we discussed on the forums. So come and check that. But again, what are we doing? You're skewing the numbers. You're giving false values. We could probably go out, we shouldn't do before a blood test and go eat a pound of bloody margarine or something and then have a blood supply in our stomach full of fat. It's just that kind of weird situation, guys. We want a proper picture of seeing exactly what's going on so that we're trying to keep ourselves alive as long as possible, as healthy as possible, and of course to get the TRT to give us all the benefits with as few of the minuses as possible. Back to you, Steve.
Next story, we're going to talk about cholesterol, AST, and ALT. Now, cholesterol, 200 milligrams per deciliter. When you run TRT, this number, if this number was high before, it's going to be high after, and vice versa. So it's not going to get affected. It shouldn't get affected by TRT unless you're overdosing TRT. Then it most certainly will affect it. So you want to keep an eye on this number. And again, it all boils down to lifestyle, stress, lack of exercise, or diet, going to lead to cholesterol issues. So if this is not good, there used to be a time where doctors would get your cholesterol levels checked. And if your cholesterol levels were bad, you know what they would say? They're like, oh, I'm sorry, you're not going on TRT until you get your cholesterols fixed. Nowadays, guys have cholesterol levels that are crazy out of whack. And you got LDL, bad cholesterol, being high, and you got HDL, which is good cholesterol, being low. And then they got total cholesterol sky high, and then they're still putting them on TRT now. So you've got to, look, it's your body, guys. I mean, you've got to be smart. And if your cholesterol levels are out of whack, you can get your lifestyle fixed. Before you do TRT, get this number fixed and get a healthy lifestyle. And you may not even need TRT if you did that. So, but if you are on TRT and your cholesterol levels are out of whack, you need to get that fixed. You need to get it fixed with or without TRT. Same thing with AST and ALT. Now, AST, it's enzyme. They're both, ALT and AST are both enzymes. They should be somewhere under 40 IU per liter. And, this really is going to be an indicator of liver, heart, muscle cells, and how strained they are. So if you drink alcohol, if you eat a lot of bad food, et cetera, then this may be already strained. If you abuse anabolic steroids, these may be already strained. So you want to keep that in mind, and you want to get this fixed before you do your TRT. But again, just like cholesterol, it's not going to get affected by TRT. It shouldn't, unless you're overdosing on the TRT in the first place. So yeah, so I mean that covers the main things you want to look for in your blood work when you do TRT. So there are ancillaries that are also that can affect these numbers. So if you are using like a doctor or anti-aging clinic and he has you on TRT, plus he has you on anti-estrogens and he has you on other drugs. I've seen anti-aging clinics even put guys on Letro, for crying out loud. So then their estrogen levels are too low. So they go on TRT and they have low estrogen levels. That's not going to work. Your estrogen levels need to be balanced. So I hope this helps. This way, when you see your blood work and you see things off, you'll know, well, that's normal in the case of LH and FSH for it to be low. But some of this other stuff, my cholesterol levels are a little high. I got to get that under control. My AST and LLT are a little high. I need to get that under control, et cetera, et cetera. So these are things to look for to keep yourself healthy long term. The objective for TRT is not to cut your lifespan by 10 or 20 years. The objective of TRT is to live a good life in your middle years and your older years. As you get into your 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond, to live a normal life. But if you're not doing it right and you're not checking your blood work, then it's like having a car and not going and getting your car maintained. It's like your teeth. What happens when you don't go to the dentist every 6 months and get your teeth cleaned and get x-rays done to see if you have cavities? What ends up happening? Then your teeth end up getting rotted and you end up spending more money in the end because now you have to get dentures. And then now you got to clean the dentures all the time and stuff. So it becomes a pain in the ass. So you want to take care of your body when you're on TRT and get your blood work done. And you have to be aware of what these numbers mean. So again, save this podcast to your files. This way, when you do to get the blood work done, check out the links that we're going to link with the websites and the articles. And then keep that handy because it's going to help you tremendously. And it's going to save you a lot of headache in the long term. So, Mobster, finish up with your final thoughts.
Yeah, guys, I agree 100% with Steve. This is all about you learning how to get the proper tests that you need from doctors. If you do it privately, the tests are asked for. It's about teaching you how to best read those tests so you can see if there are any issues that are outstanding. Talk these through with your doctor even better, ideally, of course, and with a proper clinic. It's about sourcing places that specifically work with bodybuilders. But overall, as Steve said, especially when we're talking about TRT, not just for performance-enhancing drug use and cycles to make you bigger and stronger in the gym, but specifically TRT, and especially TRT, to enable you to, as Steve said, get the best from it. Not just feel great because you're on TRT when you felt awful before, but also staying healthy for as long as possible. That's the idea. And like Steve said as well, and I said it earlier in the podcast, Steve, this is definitely one, guys, I want you, if you listen to it, go back and listen to it again. Double check the links that we've got, that we've included for how the articles that we've done on blood work for steroid users, discussions that we've had on the forum. And it's one of those things, sometimes the numbers can get confused. And we've had guys come on and say, can you tell me what this means in terms of the numbers? Make sure that you're aware, for example, that some of those numbers fluctuate with your age and so on and so forth, but specifically for the healthy or unhealthy markers. That's what we're talking about here, guys. More than anything else, learning how to read your blood test to see whether it's a good number, that your numbers are great for cholesterol, that your numbers, you haven't got problems with your liver or your kidneys because that number's skewed. Making sure that you don't skew the test by doing the wrong things before the test so that you end up with a false value and either have to go back to get the test again or read it wrong because it was skewed at the beginning. These are all super important things, which is why I'd like you to go back and reread it, or as Steve says, save it to your files, because I think it's one of those super, super important ones that surprise some people. I will just finish on this note, Steve, and I saw this actually, funny enough, we were doing pre-show research. We know, and I believe it might have even been mentioned in the article, where, especially a few years ago, top pros that had got themselves into the whole massive amounts of anabolics, so that, the grams a week, the crazy amounts of insulin, the crazy amounts of growth hormone, and so on and so forth, they were deliberately not getting the test because they did not want they were doing a whole head in the sand thing, Steve. They didn't want to see just how much they were damaging themselves. But that's not what we're about. We're about a sensible, safe as possibly we can use, and teaching you to best look after yourself. And that includes being able to read and get the right test, etc., etc., etc. So all that super, super important stuff, guys. I can't hammer that point home enough. It's super, super important. Please note, we are not doctors, and opinions are ours. Is our view and based on our experience and views on the topic. A podcast are for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.